So I have a thought for the day. Here's the thing, one of the many things that we say that we stand for here at Homeboy Industries is that we stand with the demonized so that the demonizing will stop. So why do we do that? Because all demonizing is untruth, and we want to stand in the truth. And here at Homeboy, we want to presume that the answer to every question is compassion. And that's what it means to stand with the demonized. Recently, I was part of my little book tour, I guess, and I spoke to a big packed auditorium, about 500 people, and it was a standing room, and it was a question and answer period, and somebody asked about evil. And I said, I don't know, for over 30 years I've worked with gang members, and I haven't met anybody evil yet. And then maybe you'd think I would have, but I haven't. And then I looked out at them, I said, you know what, not one of you has met anybody evil. And there was silence, but then a guy in the front row went, trust me, I've met somebody evil. He said, people kind of laughed, and I didn't want to get in an argument with them, but I in my head I went, nah, you haven't. You think you did, but you haven't. When we label somebody evil, it's like we're lazy. We didn't dig deep enough. We didn't want to understand anything. Plus, when you label people evil, then you have the byproduct of being able to say, I'm superior to that person. So it's just kind of laziness, really. But it's not true. Even Jesus in the gospel, they bring to him a guy who has epilepsy. And he was having seizures. And if it was 2017 instead of 2,000 years ago, somebody would have written him a prescription and said, well, go to the pharmacy. Here's what you can take to control those seizures. But they said he's possessed by a demon because they don't know how to explain this. And Jesus went, oh, okay, because he was a man of his time too, and he healed him, But demons, they demonized him. It didn't make any sense, but it's what we do. But if we know that, we don't demonize anyone ever, because we don't presume ill will, because that we get stuck there. When we don't demonize, we don't ever say, wow, that guy's, trust me, is really an asshole, and instead of saying that, we look at people and we say, wow, somebody's having a bad day, or that guy's in a world of pain, or imagine how badly he hurts. So we try to presume not ill will, but we try to presume that the answer to every question is compassion. I had a PO that I knew many years ago, and probably with 5 homies, he would say to me, at the period of the years I knew this guy, he'd say, trust me, don't waste your time on that guy. That guy's pure evil. And I always went out of my way to hire that guy, and then, healing began, and the guy did some work, and maybe he dealt with some challenging mental health issues, and maybe he even found some, meds through our program here so he could bring some balance, or maybe he dealt with stuff that he had been through. But mainly, those 5 guys, discovered what it felt like to be cherished, and it changed them. Yesterday I was going through a pile of letters that a guy at home that wrote me from prison, and a guy I've known for 30 years, and the letter was in English, but he gets to the end and he says in Spanish, yo no soy malo, I'm not evil. And then he adds this line, pregúntale a Dios. Ask God, just ask God. And everybody knows that God would agree with this guy. Everybody knows that. Here's the thing. Hitler, me, Charlie Manson, you, Donald Trump, we were all born wanting the same things. Every single person. Joy, happiness, peace. And then sometimes something goes wrong. Terror and torture, or violence, or mental health issues, or something happens to kind of upset that. But we were all born wanting the same things. So when I was a chaplain at Folsom Prison, and the homies there were saying, teach us something, but don't teach us the Bible, because we got a bunch of those, he says. I said, well, I don't know anything. And so they asked me what I got my degrees in, and I said, well, I have a master's degree in English. They said, teach us that. So I had 3 sections of English, and it was short stories. We didn't have money to buy books, so I made photocopies of short stories, and we would discuss them. And I had 60 students, 20 in each yard, and this one class I was in, we were discussing a short story by Flannery O'Connor called A Good Man Is Hard to Find. And it's about a grandmother who's kind of a jerk, and she's a racist, and she's tapada, and she's blind, and she's just full of herself, and she thinks she's superior until she gets to the end. And this guy named the Misfit, who's evil, or so people would say, is holding a gun to her. And she looks at him and says, wow, you're my son. And he kills her. And the punchline of the story is she would have been a good woman if there had been somebody there to shoot her every minute of her life. But be that as it may, the homies were discussing it, and they were saying things like sympathy, empathy, and compassion. And I said, well, define your terms. You're sounding like they're all meaning the same. So one guy says, sympathy means when your homie's mom dies and you say, Spencer, sorry to hear about your mom. I said, good. How about empathy? Well, empathy is when your homie's mom dies and you say, sorry to hear about your mom. My mom died 6 months ago. I know what you're going through. I said, good. How about compassion? Calladitos, nobody says a word. Come on now, compassion. They all squirm in their seats. They stare at their shoes. Nobody wants to answer the word compassion until finally a guy who was my clerk, who'd been down 30 years, just goes like this, very humbly. He says, well, compassion, that's completely different. Everybody leans in. Compassion is what Jesus did. And then everybody leans in more. And he says, in fact, compassion is God. So we stand with the demonized so that the demonizing will stop, because all demonizing is untruth. And we don't want to be lazy. We want to get underneath stuff. We want to understand stuff. Recognizing that every one of us is born wanting the same things. So we begin 2018 presuming that the answer to every question is compassion. Because that's who our God is. Amen.